So I'll just run through a few of the admin things. So hi everyone, welcome. What we usually do is we're going to hold off on asking questions until Dell's finished the main presentation. And then afterwards you can use the reactions button at the bottom to put your hand up to ask a question. Or if you're a little bit shy, or if you've got one going through the presentation you don't want to forget, feel free to type it into the chat window and we'll pick it up there as well. We've got a great presentation here. So, we're welcoming Dale Graff on a return visit to us. So welcome, Dale. He's currently the Director and Vice President of IRVA. He has degrees in Aeronautical Engineering and Physics, and he's done an extensive background in research and applications of psi phenomena. Dale became involved in remote viewing in 1976 as the Department of Defense contract manager for IRVA research. And he worked at Stanford Research Institute, and then eventually he was the director of Stargate. I forget how many years was that. How many years were you there, Dale, at Stargate?
Well, yeah, I started being involved in 1976 and then moved to Washington, D.C. for about 7 or 8 years where I was involved directly during the latter phase of the program.
But you were pretty much involved from 1976 all the way to when it finished, roughly, weren't you? Yeah.
Absolutely correct. In different roles.
Yeah. And just to finish off the introduction here, Dale's also published books, including Tracks in the Psychic Wilderness, which is a fantastic read, and River Dreams, but I haven't read that one, but I'm sure that's just as good. So I'm going to hand over to Dale now. He's got a great presentation, and we all look forward to this. And thanks again, Dale, for coming along and sharing this with us.
Thank you for having me here. And I want to go into some depth on my favorite topic, precognitive dreams and synchronicity. And I also want to discuss, as I go through the presentation, why I think we're really looking at something like a future memory issue as well. As a point of discussion later on. One of my favorite artists is Escher, and I'm sure you've all seen this etching by Escher. It's kind of symbolic, I think, of the dreaming mind, where we send things out, our thoughts, into the dark, and then they come back later on and bring us some light from the subconscious. And the birds shown here, of course, are going either way. So that's a good symbol for the depth of our subconscious. We can dwell into it in any number of manners, either awake or asleep. And I prefer the sleeping mind for a lot of practical reasons, as well as the benefits of precognitive dreaming. So why do I study, and others as well, why do we study precognitive dreams? My own motivation is the more I get into the dream world, and of course we all dream every night. We have about 20 to maybe 25%, if not more, of our sleep time is in the rapid eye movement phase, which is by definition usually the dreaming phase, although other parts of our sleep can also be considered a dream, even though we don't remember the vivid imagery that comes along with the so-called dream phase. So in dreaming, and also in psi dreaming, and I like to use the abbreviated term for psi because it encompasses a number of different ways of understanding our extrasensory potential, whether we call it remote viewing or some of the older terms like clairvoyance or precognition. I think when we study dreams, not only do we learn something about ourselves, but we get to see a little bit more about how the subconscious mind does its thing with dreams and with our own ordinary conscious awareness. I'm also interested in the dreaming world because as we look into dreams, we can get some idea of how the information is accessed and even moved around and transferred into conscious awareness. Also in precognitive dreaming, there are some really interesting potential applications here that are good for personal applications as well as for others, and I have examples of that. And my own procedure is to look at each experience. I like statistics. They tend to lump things together and you get an average feeling for what's going on. Is it how much above chance is it when you do the experimental work? But each dream experience is really an experience, and there's a lot you can learn from that. Normally, when we think about precognition, there are a number of ways in which it can be described. It's an intuition, it's a premonition, we have a gut feel about something. There are awake perceptions that can be considered as a precognitive insight into the world around you. There are subliminal perceptions that we have that might actually add to our understanding of the dreams that we have, because dreams also take advantage of what we perceive during the day through our subliminal perception, not just our ordinary perception. The term deja vu is probably familiar with you, but psychologists tend to think that that's only based on memory recall and the putting together of subliminal perceptions. But I also see deja vu as being rooted in precognitive dreaming as well. I'm going to go into one example of a dream, and this was one that I did 20 years ago. My colleague was in Vienna, Austria, set up the picture you see on the right. And when I do dream work, I focus very strongly on several aspects. I want to remember the dream, and I want to remember it clearly, and I intend to have the dream represent as fully as possible the intended target picture if I'm working with pictures. So here's an example of one of those dreams. There's one of the early ones I did with my colleague in Vienna, Austria. And in this example, the dream that presented itself are very vivid. And I also intend to remember the ending, because that's usually where most of the information is that's relevant to whatever the experimental objectives are that I'm working on. So here I sketched what I saw in the vivid dream as people running out on some kind of platform, jumping around and dancing. And I like to use colors because I find colors are really very meaningful, and they are also very attainable in the dream state. So this person jumping on the stage has this really brilliant yellow outfit on, but there also seemed to be a touch of yellow, and I think that was overplay or bleed over from the person behind. So it illustrates how exact a dream can actually present information when you set the intention and you focus on getting it as accurately as possible. But that was an experimental situation. This is a symbolic portrayal of the Shenandoah Mountains in Virginia, where I spent a lot of time over the years leading people on hiking trips and camping trips. And a couple of summers ago, I was in the Shenandoahs, and a very extensive, exhausting experience. I always like them, but they also beat you up a bit. I came back really feeling very tired. I did not intend to have any dreams, and usually I remember dreams every night. But this was a night when I did not want to remember any. I just wanted to sleep. But that's not what happened at all. I had a very startling dream. And this one is of the type that I would call lucid. In the dream, and this is a sketch I made of the ending of the dream. In this lucid dream, I become aware that I'm dreaming, and I'm looking at the action of the dream, wondering what it's about, and beginning to analyze within the dream, what is that figure? And the dream started off with a picture on the wall. I didn't show that here, but in the picture on the wall was this figure that then emerged and came toward me, carrying some long, dark object. And I remember all this very vividly, and I woke up rather startled. I thought it was some kind of aborigine. Well, it turned out that I was 2 days later, I received a email that had a picture of one of Ingo Swann's dream sketches. And the person that sent me the email wanted to have my input on Ingo's dream imagery. Now, up to this point, I did not know that Ingo even kept a record of dreams. And it turns out he was a very good dreamer. And of course, a lot of his paintings, I believe, are based on lucid dream recall. So anyway, the material in my dream 2 days ahead of time matched very closely what I saw later when I received that email from the producer of a documentary that was updating some work about his life. There was another dream that same night, and I called it a dynamic white whale. It just swirled up, and I felt this to be a very symbolic dream. The imagery was powerful. A white whale, almost like Moby Dick, swirling around, spinning. There's a lot of energy in the dream. I felt very energized. And when I looked through the email that was sent to me from that producer, I couldn't find a direct comparison with the dream like I did the previous sketch with the monk. And I called it an Aborigine, but it was an English monk sketch. But this was a painting that Ingo had attached to that email. And it really very dynamic. Now, it's not a white whale, but it sure has the sense and the feeling of something jumping up and going back into the water. So there's those two dreams, and there was another one too that was very precise that had to do with the building in New York City that I later identified as where Inga resided. But they reminded me of Dream Yoga, a book I'd read many years ago. And also, it brought attention to the fact that Ingo had an experience with yoga, a similar kind of yoga, one time in, I think it was South Korea at a monastery. So I became very interested in that approach. And of course, dream yoga is a tradition from Tibet, and it really borders very strongly, and it really, it develops very closely the idea of lucid dreaming, although in this book, it's referred to as clear dreaming. Now, there were other books I found at the time that made me realize that some of the dreams I was having were, the lucid dreams, were like what Celia Green described. And Celia Green, in 1968, published a book called Lucid Dreams, and she was a director of what was called the Psychophysical Institute at Oxford, a very thorough researcher of lucid dreaming. So lucid dreaming then became a really strong interest of mine way back then, and it continued then even to more modern times. I at one time made a connection with an individual that was doing what he called out-of-body experiments at the ASPR in New York. The experiment didn't go too far because he apparently did not follow through on some of the experimental protocol. But it had to do with looking at the correlation or how OBEs and lucid dreams can maybe relate together with one another. I want to also now, on the theme of dreaming, talk about an experiment that was conducted at the Stanford Research Institute in 1977. We called it the submarine communication experiment. We all know, most of us know about the work that Ingo and Hella Hammond did in describing by remote viewing scenes near SRI while they were in the submarine. Lesser known are the pictures that were in the submarine that were also part of the experiment. And I had volunteered to be the dreamer. We were looking at it from a dream point of view and also from a remote viewing point of view. And this was one of the dreams that occurred when that particular picture was in the submarine, a few hundred feet in salt water, 500 miles away. And even though the dream didn't present the exact details, it does show a general correlation with the shapes, the dominant shapes that were on that picture. I had no trouble choosing it as a target from 6 possibilities. There was another one that I worked on. This was in the conscious remote viewing state. Now, this is early in my involvement with SRI. And we didn't have a particular protocol. So you just sit down, relax, and intend to perceive the most prominent feature of whatever the target is, whether it's a remote scene or whether it's a picture. So this is straight imagery. It's almost like a dream image that came to me, and I sketched those out. And this was the target picture. It's a poor reproduction of the photo, but it is a woman, a blonde woman looking at a gorilla. So that part worked out okay in terms of the general features of the target coming through. So after those experiments and some of the others that I have worked on over the years, the question I have, and I'm sure we can discuss this when we get to the end of the talk here, the target pictures in this case, where were they? Were they in a submarine or were they in the future? That is a question that I'm going to drop, and we can come back to that. Where were they? In the sub or in the future? I'm going to switch over to synchronicity now, because synchronicity and precognitive dreaming are so related to one another. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with Carl Jung, who originated the term synchronicity back in the 20s and 30s. And it's just simply an observation that in some circumstances, something other than chance can be occurring in order to bring those events together. And I like to rephrase it from the point of view of a principle, call it a principle. The synchronicity principle is a subconscious cooperating goal-oriented dynamics. It's an unplanned, meaningful intersection of paths. Things are brought together. So how does that happen? So there's something going on subconsciously that brings the intersection of people finding people, somebody finding something important all together. Now, synchronicity many times will occur when we're going through transitions in our life, or travel, or something is changing. And many times, safety and well-being are what is prompting the occurrence of the synchronicity. Something happens to keep us out of trouble, or we avoid issues that we don't know about but are lurking around the corner. Pretty much a survival instinct that goes way back to the beginning of the evolution of our species. I want to talk about one such situation here. Right before any trip, I like to focus to having a dream that shows me what will I be seeing or experiencing in the trip ahead that I need to pay attention to. What is important? Many times I don't have a dream that's significant, so nothing significant happens. But here was a dream that happened at 4 a.m. The morning before I go on a trip, and a very nasty dream where a truck smashes into a car and the car breaks into fire. And in a dream, I had a sense that there was somebody trapped in the car that couldn't get out, which is not a good dream to have before you go on a trip. So a few hours later, I get caught up in a traffic lineup. I tried to avoid it, but I couldn't. I came back onto the interstate, and a short time later, at noon, I come across the accident that I saw in the dream that occurred 6 hours earlier. So it's hard to see here, but there's a white truck in the middle, and there's a car right close to it that was all mangled and burned up. So here was a case where the dream actually presented the accident scene several hours before the accident happened. And the odd thing about this particular experience, I tried to avoid the scene unknowingly. I just wanted to get out of this traffic pattern, and I made a mistake and ended up right back in the middle of it. So it's almost like a synchronicity that was forced to happen. I was almost led to see the scene. Later, I came back through that same area and got the photograph that was taken by the newspaper reporter that put it in the newspaper. Yeah, there's a better close-up of the white truck and the mangled up car right in front of it that burned. Now, not all the precognitive dreams I have are planned. Many that are spontaneous. Here was one that happened some years back. And it's not a good dream. It's very simple and to the point. I'm looking at a white car that bursts into flame and explodes. As the car resembled the one that my wife drove, I was very concerned about this. Now, since I've worked with dreams with people over the years from a counseling point of view and self-help point of view. I'm aware that a dream with fire can be anger or hatred, but that was not the case for me. We had a very good relationship. There's no problem going on in our lives. So I assumed then that this was a dream about a future accident. So I was very careful about what I would be doing with that car in the days ahead. I eventually had it checked out in the garage and found that there was a short in the fuel pump that could have led to an explosion. The mechanic replaced it. So here was a case where maybe the dream showed a possibility, and I was able to do something to prevent the catastrophe. That was a very likely occurrence. Now, other precognitive dreams I've had over the years, I don't intend to have these. They usually show up when I'm setting the objective, something like this. Every Sunday night, I will sit down quietly and write out on a piece of paper, which becomes part of my dream journal. Tonight, I desire to have a dream that shows me something interesting about the week ahead that I will either experience directly or that I will see in the newspaper. So this way, I can be alerted to something in the week ahead that might be of value, that might actually be beneficial to knowing about. So over the years, doing it this way, it turns out that during that week, there have been major airplane disasters. And some of them are not well known, but others are. And I have a list of these. And some of these are really quite detailed. And they go into actually the basis for some of the why the airplane crashed in the first place. So I'm going to go into just one illustration of these. Like I say, they're not good dreams to have, but over the years I've come to accept them. I'm not a participant. I'm an observer. So when I am an observer in a dream, then I'm quite confident. I'm not going to be in it, but I will be learning about it at some time in the future. There was a dream sketch I made on January the 27th, 2003. It was really quite vivid. And again, this occurred the night when I said, what do I need to know about the week ahead that will be of interest? So the first dream, there were two dreams. One dream is really shows turbulent, something coming through the atmosphere that's quite turbulent. And there's a lot of smoke-like debris or contrail behind it. And I thought it was a small airplane that was being tossed around, or several. Another dream followed shortly thereafter. Now, sometimes when I do this work and I have a dream which is puzzling, then I'll go back right before I go to sleep. I will intend to have a follow-up dream that provides clarification, more information. Okay, the first one looks like it would be interesting and would not relate to me personally. That might be something I would see in the future, but what is it? Can I have another dream that helps clarify? So then another dream did happen, and it was brief, and this was a sketch. I really like to sketch anything, whether it be remote viewing or dreams. And in this case, the airplane, I thought it was an airplane, started breaking up. There was like a hole in the wing. And in this particular dream, I didn't show it here, but a spotlight came on and really illuminated what looked like a torn piece at the junction where the wing met the fuselage. I think by now you kind of guess what this is about. And then 4 or 5 days later, here is the breakup of the space shuttle, and this is this picture that was flashed all over the media, and it resembled pretty much that dream 4 or 5 days earlier. And here is a detail which I didn't see for several weeks, and it actually goes into detail in the USA Today for the problem with the wing at the edge of the wing that had debris hit it and that weakened it. And that really correlated quite well with the dream that showed a hole in the wing. So an example of how precognitive dreams can be very accurate. Now, another area that I became very interested in several years ago, I've always been interested in spontaneous precognitive dreams, but they're really hard to experiment with. How do you do that in a laboratory? So it occurred to me one evening that, well, what I'm going to do with a colleague, we're going to target ourselves. We're going to intend to dream or do a remote viewing session with photographs that did not even exist anytime, nowhere. There's no target pool. Because every time you have a target pool and you select something out of it, you can always say, well, maybe you access the target pool itself, and go on through various arguments about why that photograph is not in the future. But here, if they don't exist at the time of the dream, then you really are getting close to simulating a spontaneous precognitive experience. So what we did, we set out the objective on a newspaper that I had that was local and had a very good coverage of world news. Had a very specific page in there that was quite single focused. There's one photograph per page usually. So the objective was to dream about that page 3 days ahead and perceive impressions about the photograph that would be presented in that paper, published in that paper. This is what my colleague did, my colleague in Florida. I did, Patricia Cyrus. And she did it in 2 modes, a relaxed remote viewing mode and also a dream mode. And the perception in the dream presented what looked like a young girl in purple robes. So you can see that gets the gestalt, the pattern of the picture was not even taken at this time. It was the editor had to select from 100 photos what to put in the paper. So there was a 2-day lag before anything could really develop here in terms of where the photo was. So we moved this now to 7 days in the future. So this is one that I did. And this photograph, this was the picture in the newspaper on a specific page 7 days ahead. And the photograph was taken the day before, so the event occurred 6 days after the sketch was made. And in this case, for me, the ending of the dream had a really strange-looking individual, camouflaged and covered with all kinds of strange-looking pieces of junk, walk out of a picture that was on the wall. So again, it correlated quite well with the actual future target picture. There was another one that has a little bit of a different twist. A huge crowd of people. This was a photo. This was a sketch made 7 days before the event, before it was photographed and published. And in this case, there was a strange shape in the bottom right that resembled, I thought at the time, it looks like Japanese writing, but it actually turned out to be a Korean, words written in Korean. The storyline to this was demonstrating against nuclear weapons. And that was what was in a dream. That was what the dream figure was saying, anti-nuclear weapons. And the only way you can tell that is not from the photo itself, but from the caption underneath the photo, or reading South Korean, which I can't do. So I assumed that I picked up on the caption. So that was one of the first clues I had, that in this mode of perception, it is possible to pick up on reading, and it's something I wanted to develop a little further. Now, the work that I went through here was just 1 or 2 or 3 examples. This is just part of a whole series of projects that we did. And ultimately, it became, I was asked to give a presentation at a quantum conference, quantum retrocausalization conference, it was called, part of a physics symposium in San Diego. And I gave the presentation, and that paper was the results of the dream work. And I was able to set it up in such a way that we could do some kind of statistical evaluation of it as well. And we actually had about 65% success rate. But each picture itself had quality data in it. So it was more than just simply a statistical exercise. Now, what came out of that symposium was statements about retrocausation as a principle that we live in. You know, it's some kind of it represents an active subconscious interaction between the future and the present. It's ongoing all the time. So that's one of the concepts behind retrocausation. It's just something like a probability wave in the future that individuals access, or the subconscious mind can link with, and the future information then is brought into conscious awareness, either through the dream consciousness or then through a remote viewing awake state process. So whether it's retrocausation or some other word, I don't know, that we can push into a discussion. Another avenue for the work that we did from the dream side, that was published here about a year and a half ago. Deborah and Nancy Smith, Michelle Valgas, James Lane worked together on this, and this project ran about a year and a half, and we finally got it together. All of us were dreamers. The analysis was made, and the results were statistically significant, that we were able to actually show, using dream time, that we could also predict the outcome of the sporting events using an ARV procedure adapted for dream work. Now, one of the things I like to do over the years is, how do I practice this? I don't always want to be having some dream about an accident or something that's scary, but I wanted to set up a procedure where I could, whenever I felt like it, and I wouldn't need to draw on somebody's help. How do I practice precognitive dreaming or any kind of side dreaming? So it occurred to me one night when I was looking through the newspaper that the jumble of cartoons are kind of interesting. So if you look at the cartoon, they're quite busy. The cartoon figures tend to be similar from one cartoon to another. But there's material here that's worthwhile thinking about from a practice session point of view. You got shapes, you got forms. You have, in this case, this example one has water in the background, and there's a dialogue in there. So I decided this is going to be an objective that I'm going to set myself to explore. Is it possible to incorporate the essence of the jumbo cartoon in a dream? So in a way, it's just looking at, and I limited this to 1 day out, the next day's paper. I could extend it further, and I haven't got to that stage yet, but this is a fairly recent project that I'm reporting on here. So to put it in words, the objective is to experience a dream that presents key geometric features and implied actions of the cartoon figures. The important thing here is implied actions. I didn't want to remember the cartoon figures themselves, because they really didn't change a lot from one cartoon to another, but their actions did. So if I would have been able in these dreams to sketch something that closely resembled some of the features of that cartoon and any of the actions that the cartoon figures were implying, then I would consider that a success. So I did this in February, throughout the months, and the dream then was to access this jumbo cartoon that I would be looking at the next day. So I have a series of them here, and I'll show the dream summary. This time I'll include some words on the left. The center of the cartoon, the sketch I have, will be what I perceived at the end of the dream that I sketched before I actually bought the paper and looked at it the next day. And then there's the cartoon on the right. So if you excuse my sloppy sketching, here's an example of the first one I tried. Here in the dream, toward the end, some figure on the left-hand side walks over to a table, and there's some plates on the table. And I'm looking at the content of the plates, and I notice that they're kind of brownish, reddish looking, But the one on the right-hand side is quite green, and it reminded me of green vegetables, as my words have there. And then somebody reaches down and picks up the objects. Again, I didn't draw the cartoon figures. I could see them vaguely in the background of the dream, but that wasn't really what I wanted to do. I wanted to capture the essence of the forms and the shapes and the dynamics of it, which this illustrates to, I think, a fair degree. There was another one that illustrates this principle. Now, here, if you notice, it's hardly any color in it, and the one prior to that, the watercolor. So that's another discriminant to how well do the colors match. Now, in this particular dream, a dream figure walks toward me from the left-hand side, holding some kind of square, rectangular-looking paper. The dream figure seems to have a very dark lip area, like there was something painted on his lips. So I sketched that in. I wasn't sure what that was. His right hand is pointing to something, as you see, that's sketched there. And he's pushing that paper, whatever he has, to the right-hand side in this dream, where somebody else, I see a hand come in that now holds an object that the individual is giving him, and appears to squeeze the object somewhat. And something falls out of it like a drop of something. So if you look at the picture, it's a busy picture, but some of the key elements have come through here, even including the little drop that's shown in the center of the cartoon. So certainly the whole picture didn't end up in the dream because I didn't want it to, it's too busy, but it can convey the essence of the picture, and I felt very comfortable that access had been made with that future cartoon that I'll be seeing the following morning. Now here's another one. This one didn't have too many figures in it. They were there in the background, but again, I don't really need to see them unless there's something unique about them. But in this case, again, a hand comes in that's visible, just a hand comes into the dream scenario and reaches for a glass, and the glass seems to be half full of something that I perceived in the dream, and I'm looking at it. This is quite vivid. It's like looking at a real table with a real glass and a very specific red liquid in the glass. And there's a voice in the dream that says, "This is good for you. Please drink it." And if you read the caption on the top of the cartoon, it looks like a doctor is talking. "I have good news for you. It's treatable." So the dream presented a remedy of some sort, as the cartoon caption on the bottom said. So even though it's a very brief perception, again, it captures the essence of the main point of the cartoon. Another one. Now here was a little different issue. The hand that I see in the dream is coming in from the right-hand side, and there's something that the individual was holding that he puts on the paper. And in the dream, I'm aware that it's a $1 bill. Now, if you look at the cartoon, it actually is somebody drawing what looks like the beginning of the design of the dollar bill. But the interesting thing to me is I turned in a dream, it became green, whereas in the real cartoon it's white. So I think it illustrated to me that no matter how much we try, we're not going to be keeping some of our subconscious associations out of the play here. And I could never think, it's unlikely for me to think about a dollar bill that's white. So the dream accommodated my expectations and made it green. It's like analytic overlay only occurring in a dream, and I call this phenomenon memory overlay. So my memory of dollar bills overruled, and I made it green, and it really wasn't green. But either way, there is the action. There is something on the paper, like that inkwell in the background there. So lots of details come through on these little examples. Now, of all the jumbo cartoons that I worked on, and the ones that I've been keeping and clipping ever since, because I'm creating a backlog of these to create a comparative target pool for later on blind judging, this is the only one that's only of animals. All the others have cartoon people or representations of people in some pose. So this is the only one that had animals in it. And this is the only, and the dream only had animals, black, dark animals. And I didn't know what they were. I took a stab at it, but I just couldn't recognize what these dark animals were. And of course, if you look at the cartoon, unless you read the caption, you're probably not going to be able to figure out that these are supposed to be gorillas. So I was very happy with this, even though it's not a very good target from the point of view of clean, distinct boundaries. But it did convey the point that there are no people in it, and it's all animals. This one here was a little different, quite dynamic. Again, the action comes in from the right here, and the individual is holding something. I didn't know what it was in the dream, but he moves it toward an object. Has a yellow shape on it, and it appears to strike the object. So I didn't do the analysis after that I wrote the dream out, but I would have guessed that it was depicting something like a hammering or almost lighting a candle. And in fact, the yellow got so bright in the dream, I at first thought it really was a flame, but it's not. So I sketched the positions of the 4 yellow areas, and you can see they tend to correlate with the positions of the 4 yellow squares, and the dark object is again representing the dark object, the hammer that the carpenter is holding. Again, I didn't see the people in it because, as I said in the beginning, I don't really want to see the cartoon figures. They're the same over and over. They just change positions and the dynamics involved. So the last one that I want to show you, I wanted to do something different. And there's always the question of words and letters and numbers. So I set as an objective not to go for the picture itself, but to go for the top letter, in this case, M. That was my objective. Whatever that letter is that I'm going to be looking at the following morning, whatever it is, whatever letter of the alphabet, I wanted to have a dream that presents a word or an object that begins with that letter. Now, I knew this would be kind of tricky because I have quite a few dreams every night. So the additional conditioning, you might say, of the dream intent was, I only want one dream that I'm going to remember tonight. Otherwise, it gets too complex. And I want to have that dream feature very briefly some action that has that letter in it that's clearly represented as that letter. So this was the result. Right before I wake up, I have a very brief and vivid dream where I'm walking into a field and look up at a moon. And I'm really struggling to see the moon because the sky is cloudy. I can't quite see the moon. I got to be a moon there. Has to be a moon. And I wake up. So that was it. That was my choice. That the letter that I will see the next morning when I open up the newspaper on the top left is going to be an M. And that's what it was. It was the M. So it suggests to me that it's possible to fine tune our psi perception to get into words and names. I already talked about the Korean picture with the nuclear dialogue. So in that case, the dream actually presented the dialogue or the caption that appeared at the bottom of that cartoon. So to wrap up on precognitive dreaming, I would like to say that for me, it's really been a great experience. I began keeping records of dreams of any kind in 1970. And the second dream I've recorded was a precognitive of somebody's pending health situation, which nobody expected, and it did occur that way. So I've been keeping records fairly extensively ever since that time, and a lot of them are precognitive, and especially when I intend to have a precognitive dream. If I don't, I will still have them. But then if I do, it's because of some other issue that I'm not aware of. It might be subconscious, or it might be something having to do with safety. So for me, then, they have provided a huge amount of assistance for myself and for others. I am absolutely convinced that some of these precognitive dreams have allowed me to keep myself and others out of serious trouble. And one or two of them, I would think I could even classify as being life-saving. So whatever the case, we can have precognitive dreams most any time you want them. If we're looking at assistance, they might end up showing us how to something that we can avoid or prevent, or at least we can be prepared for it. And again, I think basically it's aimed at safety and survival. But in terms of application, no, you do a lot with them. And for many years, I actually did counseling, and I worked with people at almost a therapeutic counseling level, using dreams to help individuals identify issues in their lives that they had been avoiding, ignoring, or not even been aware of, that needed to be brought out and worked with. So I did a lot of counseling. It was very successful. And I've also had precognitive dreams, or any kind of dream. Doesn't have to be precognitive. It could be a real-time one, finding things. And I've adapted them occasionally into projects based on an associated remote viewing protocol, which I like to think of in a more generic term. That's a target linking protocol, because I don't want to pin this down to a particular concept of psi, whether it be remote viewing or dreams. Could be some other process that's going on here. In proficiency exercise, I remember dreams easily, but when it comes to side dreams, yeah, I like to work with cartoons. I like to think about what I'm going to be seeing in the newspapers a day or two or 5 or 7 days ahead. I find it fun to do, even though some of the content is not too good, particularly when you have an airplane accident, tragedy. Which, like I said earlier, about a dozen of those. So precognition, man, or precognitive dreaming, what are we really dealing with here? Are we talking about ourselves in the future, like sending signals back from ourselves, like we become our own telepathic source? Or are we talking about the retrocausation from a neutral probability wave point of view, like the quantum physicists are talking about these days? So what is precognition? Where is the target picture? Where is the future? Now, synchronicity, to wrap up here with that, it can happen anytime, and you only need to be specific about what the need is. I could be studying intently. I need to find this book or that individual, and then go to the library, and there's that book right there in the shelf. It's happened to me a lot of time. That was sort of a conscious need, but sometimes the need is not even understood. I've had people come to me many times who want to talk about dreams, and the dream led them to something that they hadn't even thought of before, and it brought them into a new avenue of creativity. Some of my colleagues in the Association for the Study of Dreams rely on dreams for inspiration for their artwork or for hearing music, like some of the Beatles have done, and some of their popular songs. So it's the synchronicities occur, and we bump into things, we find things. And for me, over the years, I've just simply accepted this ability that we all have. I haven't given it any specific name. I don't call it remote viewing of this or that. I just say it's a synchronistic experience, and we open ourselves to this process, which will involve whatever precognition is or can be defined to be. It's an existing process that's going on all the time. And even when we don't know it, it'll happen. And sometimes I think synchronicity occurs with people. We all know people that have bad luck, and there's always a cloud over their heads. Sometimes they're feeling they're brought into these situations for some other lesson that they need to know. So it's still synchronistic, but maybe not from a positive point of view, but valuable for them nevertheless. So I'm right back to Escher. I'm right back to thinking about the birds that fly into the night on wings, dream or dream birds, and then they come back the other way with whatever the knowledge is, whatever the perception is that lightens up the landscape below, the dreamscape below. So this is just my excursion with Escher, and I've always enjoyed looking at these paintings. They remind me of the range of our subconscious mind, particularly at night when we are asleep and dreaming, and free ranging, so to speak. A dreaming mind can go in many dimensions, in many directions. Well, that's all I want to say right now. So we can probably go to some questions. And there you are on my excursion into synchronicities and precognitive dreaming and memory of sorts, whatever it is. So,
Excellent, Dale. I mean, I don't know what the editor's going to say on this, but I've seen some of that stuff before, and I still find it just as fascinating this time. Maybe it's because I'm a designer. I see a lot more visual information in remote viewing than I do in the word stuff. But for me, your words, your sketches there are some of, for me personally, they're some of the best data sources and sketches that I've seen within the psychic process. I could see the information clearly, and I find it really interesting in your dream stuff how you really did hone in on the most important parts of the cartoons,
yeah.
and omit the other stuff, which was amazing, really.
Yeah, see, that's an issue when you're dealing with really complex stuff, and then the real world is full of complexities. You have to get through that somehow. People talk about too much noise around you. I have the opposite point of view. Bring the noise on.
Yeah, yeah,
Set the intention to wiggle around and get through it. So
yeah,
one of the advantages of those complex cartoons, you have stuff on there you don't want to see repeatedly over and over and over again. Those cartoon figures are a little too silly. I don't want them showing up in my dreams every night.
yeah,
But if they have a hand that's doing something, I want to see what that is. It gives me a clue to the action of the dream.
yeah,
So it's a matter of focusing, and this didn't happen to me overnight. I've been working on this for decades, but that's my approach to it.
yeah,
Focus on what it is you really want, and get through all the other stuff. And that's not. I'm not saying that sometimes don't drag up in the dream an association that's wrong. That those things do happen. So then I end up looking at well, maybe the dream was a little bit too fast in doing its memory matching process that's going on there. Which I think is happening, and even in the future, when we think we're doing a precognitive experiment, like the ones I mentioned earlier with the pictures that were in the submarine, and even that first picture with my colleague in Vienna, Austria, and the picture with the whirling dervish, there was I think a good sketch of
yeah,
the main figures. Where was that? Did I perceive that in real time when she was looking or had the photos somewhere or wherever it was? I don't know if it was sealed up or not, but anyway, it was in Vienna, Austria. Or did I just scoot ahead 5 days to when I got the email with the actual photo?
yeah, yeah,
So I don't know. I'm torn between
yeah.
models.
In the process, anyway, yeah. Before we go ahead, if you guys got any questions, put them in the chat or raise your hand. I'll just finish with my other quick question.
Sure.
I love the process of your dream information only showing you the most important, relevant stuff. Do
Yeah.
you think that because there must be some kind of editing choice process going on somewhere? Do you think that's actually internal in you, or do you think there might be some kind of intelligence in the RV psychic process that's doing that editing choice for you?
Well, here's my perception on this. In at night when we sleep, you have quite a bit of time there, all night almost. So my assumption is that there's something going on, and the subconscious mind has a lot of time to figure it out. So I've sort of sometimes say to myself, dear subconscious mind, if you're smart enough to show me a picture or a scene or whatever it is, you should be smart enough to figure out what part of that picture belongs to the picture and what part belongs to something else, like noise or some other unrelated aspect. So, dear subconscious mind, you figure it out. You do the sorting. You must know what you're doing. You got there in the first place. So just show me after the night's work, if that's what it takes. Just the essence, the real being, the real meaning of what it is I'm looking for, not anything else. You sort it out. So I'm throwing it back to the subconscious mind.
Excellent. Yeah. Thanks for that.
What you were saying, it's a process that can go on when you kick it around a little bit and say, hey, listen, I don't want all this other garbage. Just get to the bottom line. You should be able to figure it out. So that's kind of my attitude on that.
Yeah. Thanks for that. Should we stop your screen sharing now, and then we can let the guys to
Okay.
show their faces on screen. And I think Don's got his hand up first. If you want to ask your question there, Don.
Okay. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, good. So my first question is, can you explain the process, how you record your dreams? I mean, the exact methodology. Do you wake up like at 7 a.m. and then grab a book? Are you using a tape recorder? Are you waking up in the middle of the night and taking some sort of notes, that sort of thing?
Well, initially, I was a little too complex about this thing. I'd wake up several times during the night, and that became a little bit bothering if you do that consistently throughout the week. So depending upon the objective, what in dream work, we call it dream incubation. So the night before, or even the day before, I'll just write out the objective. I don't do this as much anymore because I just think about it. But early on, I just write it out, and then make sure in my dream journal it's stated at the top of the page. Tonight I desire to. Okay, dream about this. Now, it doesn't have to be anything psychic or anything psi. It doesn't have to be precognitive. Could be any topic. Well, the first time one of the first few weeks, when I really realized I could remember dreams as well, what I wrote out on the top was, tonight I desire to hear the most beautiful guitar music that I've ever heard. And I don't know much about guitars or anything. I just want to toss it out. And that night was the most vivid production of flamenco guitar music I've ever heard. Where did it come from? So it was just focused on just that theme, only that music, and then I did the same thing for their other instruments throughout the week and went through a whole orchestra. But nevertheless, it's a matter of focusing. This is what I desire to dream about. Or if it's conscious state, then you're doing a remote viewing session. Then you have that concept in prior to the session. But I write it out, and then think about it right before I go to sleep. And I might wake up a few times, and each time I do wake up, I'll repeat that thought. I no longer need to read it. I'll just repeat that thought. And also, I don't like to make this too complex like I did early on. I'll keep it very simple. Stay with the latter part of the evening before you wake up, maybe a couple of hours before you wake up, at the latest, because that's the time when our REM cycle is getting close to ordinary awareness anyway. Early on in the night, you're in very deep phases of sleep. You're really down in there, the deep stuff. So you're not going to wake up easily. And we all have that experience. Nightmares, that's where the nightmares are. But later on, the REM cycle gets closer and closer to waking awareness. So it's a lot easier than when you ever dream to wake up quickly and write it down. I like to sketch in my journal on the bed. I don't turn on any light. I don't use a recorder. I just make a rough sketch, a few keywords, and that is enough, I found, to recall the whole thing later on in the morning. Now, if it's a lucid dream, that's different. This is like a waking experience. I mean, you are aware in a dream. So it's a lot easier to recall, although they can be very long also. But the lucid dreams, and the reason I like to work with lucid dreams, that you can get a lot of detail that's exact, and you can remember them a lot easier, because it's just like now looking at something and sketching it out. It's remembering what I see basically right at the moment. So it's a matter of practice. And then sometimes I was overly ambitious years ago, and I had too much stuff, so I had to tone it down a bit and limit it to a couple of nights a week. I'll do this kind of work. But and sometimes the dreams got almost too emotional, so I had to back off and intend that they become more of an observer rather than a direct participant in the dream dynamics. So it's a matter of working around your own style and preference, but intention and focus. Many years ago, when I did dream workshops, initially individuals had trouble remembering dreams. I just walked around the yard a few times and say, okay, repeat, and just keep focusing. And I also liked in those days, when I lived in Chesapeake Bay, and we ran a bed and breakfast, and people would come by and I would do dream work with them. I would then also take them out in my canoes, and we'd look for fossils. And fossils are a great source for subliminal perception development. And the more you remember things around you, even now, you don't have to be anything significant. You just pay attention to your environment. You're giving lucidity to the world around you, and you're putting attention on things, and that attention is helps you in dream recall as well. And another trick was to take individuals out into the yard or anywhere and say, okay, now imagine that this is a dream that you're in at this tree or this whatever, this rock, and just gaze at it and say, you are a dream rock. I want to remember you when I walk into the house and sketch you. So you're reinforcing yourself, your conscious and your subconscious mind. This is what you want to do. This is what you want to remember, and this is the kind of detail. And then you just sketch it in detail. And these kinds of practices were very useful to people. And I don't do them anymore because I don't need to. But if I ever go into a slump, I would go back to those kinds of procedures.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you very much.
Anyone else have any questions right now before I go to the ones in the chat window? Okay, I'll go to the first one in the chat window then, from Chris. And he says, I experienced single word synchronicities, being the same word from two unrelated sources, specifically one read and another one heard at the same time, like the game Jinx. Is this psi, or could this just be my brain pairing them with perfect timing?
Well, synchronicity, as defined, kind of relies on a need, an objective. If it just happens to be something that you experience and you think about it, and there's no connection to something you want to do or accomplish or some need, I would tend to say it's a coincidence. Not all synchronicities are synchronicities. There are coincidences in the world. So if we stay with the definition, and I think it's valid to do that, how does the experience of the two events coming together relate to an interest or a need. It could be minor, but normally when you have the synchronistic experience, it's really powerful. There's a book I sometimes reference in my workshops called The Genetic Connection. It was a PhD thesis that was written by the author, and who had been abandoned as a child and had to try to find their birth parent. And she wrote a whole book on synchronicities involved with individuals locating their birth parent, after 20, 30 years. And some of those experiences were unbelievable. I mean, when I say unbelievable, that's getting pretty tough. But how could people find one another in such incredible circumstances? So there's something going on that was not a coincidence. That was the whole point of her book and her thesis. Something brought the people together.
Excellent, thanks for that one. And I got one from Tracy here, and she says, do you find anything you do before sleep helps to have more precognitive dreams? And she talks about things like meditation and maybe other tools.
I go back now to trying to think of what I did back in the 70s. I was really a physical fitness nut. Well, I still am. But I was really active physically, and I did a lot of walking and hiking. I still do, but being in the wilderness for me was like a meditation process. Without even thinking about the word meditation. I think the Japanese have a term for this right now called forest breathing or something like that. You really get caught up in the overall environment, and what this does is it puts you outside of your ego structure. And then you just become almost boundless. So there's something about the concept of mind expansion, even though you're not aware of it, that I think is helpful. And meditation, I understand, and I've done that over the years. I'm not as diligent at it right now, but in some of my canoe trips in the Arctic tundra, I found that just being out in the incredible wilderness was itself almost a spiritual experience. You feel so connected to everything, and the unseen, the seen, the spiritual aspects of nature. So I guess you might say I'm kind of a nature person. Naturally fell into this kind of connection with the subconscious, and probably natural to be remembering dreams. And I didn't realize it for many years, but when I read some journals on this, on infants, children that are born premature, as I was, you do have about 50% or even double the amount of REM sleep than regular term children. So maybe even then I had a slight advantage on dream recall because my subconscious mind is trying to make up for deficiencies elsewhere in myself. So there's just a thought, it might have been a factor. I didn't do much with dreams initially after childhood, even I remembered some until in the 30s. So it was kind of like a dormant situation. And interest that just didn't go away. I was sort of gnawing at me, and maybe a synchronicity was what actually brought me around to it, or even some dramatic experiences. Really hard to say what actually did it. It made me realize I could remember dreams easily. So that's just something I'm writing up right now for the Many Worlds of Lucid Dream conference that's coming up in October. And why I might have had the dream connection. It goes way back to experiences like that.
Excellent, thanks for that one, Dale. And Ned has had his hand up for us. So Ned, if you want to ask your question.
Yes, I was wondering, can you use dreams or precognitive dreams in remote influencing, or say to find out the next winning lotto numbers?
Well, getting to the last question first, then report I showed the cover of for the Society for Psychical Research, SPR in London, that was a year and a half long study where we did use an ARV concept in dream work for predicting the outcomes of sporting events. So the same principle would probably apply for any other kind of you might say betting situation or chance situation that has a binary outcome. Not sure about numbers. Like the example I showed with the M and other things. I remember reading the captions to cartoons. Yeah, the numbers came in there too. I just haven't really developed it, but I think it can be. Now, the first part of your question depends on what you mean by remote influencing. I have a different take on this. And I think partly because of my connection with Jungian philosophy and synchronicity and connectivities. The basic concept behind synchronicity, which is a cooperative subconscious agreement that we have. So if I need to find you and you're lost somewhere and all of a sudden pop out of the jungle and there you are, we were both walking around aimlessly. How did that come about? There's some kind of subconscious agreement that brought us together. It wasn't pure chance, but there was some kind of guiding principle, I think. So, and I think what happens with remote influencing, it's not so much an influence, like, oh, I'm going to have somebody do this and do that. You know, the ego comes into the play here. Now we're the big ego guys. So bang, wham. But rather think of it like at a subconscious level. If I'm a healer, I would desire the Healy or the Healy to recover from the illness. You know, so the appeal is not me forcing that, but seeking some kind of subconscious agreement at a level which is either within the person or at some maybe some higher, maybe a spiritual level, that there's an agreement, and then something develops from there. But it's not a forcing thing. I just don't see remote influencing as a force. It may appear that way. But there's something that the individuals agreed upon at a subconscious level, and you may never know that you did that. That's just my viewpoint, and that doesn't mean it's right, but it just happens to be the way I've come. I wrestle with the concept of remote influencing a lot, and I just think the word is not a good word.
Yes, sir.
It creates all kinds of issues. All you have to do is study the history of some of the bad things that happened in various governments over the decades, centuries.
That's true. That's true.
The word mind control and mind influence, that's a really first thing. And you don't want that. And in fact, one time during the Stargate program, we lost a potential chunk of money from somebody that was going to invest or provide funds to continue the research because somebody inadvertently used the word mind control when they were really referring to controlling their own minds. You know, in meditation, you control your mind. You know, what do you think CRV is? It's controlling a process. Or you take any kind of yoga or any kind of martial arts. The key concepts in there toward the latter phases, the level 7 or 8, or whatever the numbers are, you're controlling your mind, not somebody else's. Now you try to figure out what someone else is going to do. So you try to stay a step ahead by perceiving an intention. And I have some good friends that are in the martial arts, and they really do feel that they are split milliseconds ahead of the thought processes in the so-called opponent. Not an enemy, use the word opponent, remember that. You're not fighting, you're cooperating with the opponent, even though it looks like you're whacking one another around. So there's something of a cooperative nature going on here, and we sometimes misinterpret that as being a forceful thing.
Would you prefer the term remote reasoning or remote convincing?
Well, John, you would bring that up. For some reason, I've been wrestling with that lately, and I've been trying to come up with a better term. So,
Right. Okay.
remote, uh,
Symbiosis, maybe?
remote agreements, something. Let me think about that. I'm not ready to pop a word
Okay.
up.
Thank you.
You're on
Thank
the
you
right
very
track.
much.
Ed, I think you're on the right track there. I think that's the concept I'm trying to get at. If
All
you
right.
come up with
Thank
the
you.
right word, let me know.
Dash said something about remote
Symbiosis.
symbiosis.
Yeah,
It's-
symbiosis might be good. Yeah, it's sort of a coming together of things, a blending, a confluence. Yeah, yeah. So it's I'm just uncomfortable with the word, and that probably goes back to government.
That's true.
And whenever we had to go through a human use review panel, we had to really be careful of the words we used here. Wow, you'd be shut down if they still remnants of that old CIA program is still buzzing around.
Yeah.
Mind control.
Excellent. Thanks for that answer. And Deborah's had her hand up for a while as well. Would you like to ask Deborah?
Well, it's a little bit more of an observation about synchronicities in general, because I feel, speaking of synchronicities, my fire alarm just started chirping just last 5 minutes. And look, see this painting behind me?
Yes.
I painted this painting several years ago, and I don't know if you can see, but it's it's a whole circle, right?
Sure.
And I thought I was painting the sun.
Mhm.
I thought I was painting the sun, an abstract sun. It's kind of hideous, I know, but it's my sun, and I painted it. So
Okay.
within a few months, SARS coronavirus hit Toronto, the first wave, like not this pandemic, but the first SARS back a few years ago happened right after I painted this painting. I mean, what is this? Right? So I feel like I've been living my life by synchronicities. I started noticing synchronicities even before this painting going on.
Yeah.
And the reason I'm even in this group is because of synchronicities that I was experiencing with a certain remote viewer that who was in the Zeitgeist suddenly. Like everywhere I was seeing this certain viewer. And I've been on a path of synchronicities that is leading up to something fairly meaningful in terms of psychic experiences I've had of premonitions of the future, dreams and visions.
Yeah.
And I even wrote to you. I wrote you emails a year or so ago, a couple of years ago, when I started really researching into all this, telling about how I had that vision of the building exploding in Toronto, and I've been sort of on that path to, and it's like not really a choice. You're right. It's more of an agreement. So I see the synchronicity, and I can decide if it interests me and I want to look into it. But I see them all the time. And even at one point in my prayer life, I started to say, I think this is a way of God talking to me and sort of confirming that I'm on the right path, that because I had resolved, that I wanted to follow God, as a Christian. So how hard could it be? Well, it's pretty hard, actually. And so I found the synchronicities to be really helpful in terms of meaningful confirmation between myself and something in the universe going on. Whether it's God or not, I'm still not sure. This is part of an experiment. But I feel almost as if there aren't any synchronicities happening. I don't feel right about the world. I feel like I should be seeing them. And I'm not sure why that is. But I feel like my life has more meaning and more direction when I'm in tune with the synchronicities. You see?
You're in synchronous with yourself. That makes sense, symbolically and actually. Yeah, the synchronicities after 9/11 were really quite profound. There's a couple of books out on that.
I was reading a book right before 9/11 about an attack on the World Trade Center.
Yeah,
financial tough.
Bunny Mac, no, I've forgotten her last name now. In fact, I was actually invited to the NBC studio in New York as part of a precognitive dreaming program, which never aired because it got too powerful. When they got into the in interviewing the survivors, the spouses of the people that had perished in 9/11, it was really almost too emotional for the producer to deal with that. So they scrubbed the whole episode. But it was filled with premonitions, stories about what people did beforehand, and then afterwards, they would I would call them synchronous events that happened that brought people together or found things or certain things happening, even in nature. That's something's happening to synchronize.
Yeah, like, are you familiar with the World Consciousness Project with the sensors?
Yeah.
And they, right before, say, 9/11, they have this project has all of these random number counters, and they're situated all around the world, even out in the middle of the ocean. And they're just doing random numbers, ones and zeros. But around the time where there's large populations of people and a large event of some kind, they find the number counters in that area start to go into correlation and they become non-random, which is really weird. And I started to realize that my synchronicities, they're like a non-random zone, like I'm in the non-random zone. I don't know what that means either yet, but somehow, some days I'm walking in a non-random zone, some days I'm in a random zone. Yeah. So I'm starting to differentiate the different feels I get on what kind of energies are going on around me. And and even the random number counters seem to be able to register this field. I think it's a consciousness field. And is in areas where there are large numbers of people, so there's a large consciousness field, the random number counters will correlate with that. So there's something real, I believe, going on when it comes to synchronicities. I think it's almost like the fabric of reality. Like a weaving.
It just follows through the whole concept of connectivity and how does this process work, So it's there. It just exists.
Because you can try to force stuff when you're wanting to do, like I pray, and I pray for things to happen and to change things. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And it does have to do with that agreement. But there are a lot of other variables and factors, like just tons when you get into that kind of thing. So I want to do some experiments on it, maybe in the future.
Yeah. Great. Wonderful.
Thank you so much for talking and sharing this information. It's fascinating.
Okay, well, thank you.
Thanks for that, Deborah. Dom, would you like to go next again?
Oh, John.
Yeah. I was intrigued by what you were saying about, bring on the noise, like you navigate your dreams or you navigate the energy that you're can you say more about that? Because, I get fuzzy dreams. I get some clear dreams. I don't even know sometimes what I'm getting. It looks like a mishmash of maybe 5 or 6 different things all happening at once. Can you say a little bit of how you navigate your dreams?
Yeah, okay. There's several kinds of dreams here. There are dreams where I really want to have details, particularly if it's dealing years ago when I was working with individuals in a counseling mode. I really did want to have more detail. I wanted to find out about their noise and get through that. But later, when I did more experimental work, you don't want to have overlays come in, whether they be memory or analytic or whatever. So, the transition from long dreams that are kind of random and then kind of fit in with your day-to-day stuff and personal ramblings. You have to. We're talking about a different kind of dream. It's already been sorted and filtered at the dream making level. So whatever wobbling you did to get through all the noise around you, the subconscious mind figured it out. So I don't really think a lot about it anymore. I just intend that the dream be clear It's kind of a borrowing from the dream yoga tradition of Tibet, when this is sort of their focus as well. The desire of clarity, and let the subconscious mind figure it out. I can't. I mean, I can't. I don't know how this process works. I can just set a goal and an objective. And then with that objective, have qualifiers, like in the case of dream work, that it occurred late at night when I know that it'll be easier to remember, and that it'll be brief and to the point, because maybe I forgot to mention that earlier as part of the induction of the dream. Because the briefer it is and to the point, the less chance there is of you dragging noise along with it or non-relevant material. I don't hate to call it noise. It may be relevant, but not right then to that particular objective. So the dream, I call this, I have a term for this, dream strategy making or something like that. And it's a matter of what you don't want. Now, you don't want to focus on negatives. You don't want to say, I don't want to remember the elephant in the middle of the room, that kind of scenario. But the concept is kind of similar. You say, I don't want anything non-relevant, and then but I do want to recall what is relevant. So it's sort of I do and I don't thing. So maybe my total dream incubation is more than just simply an objective what I want, but there's a subtlety here about what I don't want as part of the objective that I don't like to make a big deal about it, because then I may get sucked into it.
And when you're dreaming, or when you wake up and you remember your dream, is it kind of like a knowing? In other words, when you were doing those cartoons, you had an arm coming in from just one side.
Yeah.
And did you just have a knowing that it was there, like you knew that it was an arm, or was it more like you're looking through a pinhole camera where all you see is a tiny little bit of a bigger picture?
No, it's a whole scene, and it's the arm is not always detached. There's a vague shape of something behind it, which is the cartoon figure. But since I'm not interested in seeing those silly faces, it's blocked out of the dream awareness. And I because I tend to pick up on motion and dynamics, it will stay with anything that looks like it's in motion. And that arm looks like it's in motion. That hammer is really clearly a dynamic object when you look at it from what it implies. The arm holding it was a secondary thing, so you didn't really need to know who was holding or what the figure looked like. So because of the focus was on the dynamics of it, it stayed with whatever is more dynamical in those cartoons. And the figures standing in the background are kind of static. They just happen to be hanging around. And sometimes they remind me of a Shakespearean play where you have all these characters milling around off stage, and then here comes the clue, and then here they are coming into the middle of the theater. And because the theater is not always well lit, it's only the central part where you want the actors to be seen. You may not even notice the rest of the people, the figures that are standing there, only what they might be doing at that moment. And
so your intent is actually filtering some of this stuff out for you.
Oh yes, it's my filtering by thinking only when it's relevant to the objective, which is to perceive anything having to do with shape, form, and motion or implied motion, or anything that might be, if it's a cartoon figure that's unique, not just simply what the cartoon figure is doing, but is there something unique about that figure, like that first one or the second one which looked like a huge black marks over the lips, which turned out to be a mustache. Now that was unique enough to be included as part of the take of the dream. So I had, in that case, I got the whole person because it was unique. Different from the other ways the cartoon figures are presented, which are fairly standard from one jumbly cartoon to the other. So you're right. It's a sort of by focusing what I really want to see, sort of by default, filters out the static nature of the cartoon figures that are just milling around in the background, so to speak, ready to jump on stage as necessary.
So when you're, how do I ask this question? When you're dreaming these things, I mean, that cartoon was really like that. That's really different. Dreaming a cartoon. Were you sharing the same mind space as the artist, or were you? Do you think you were just looking into the future and you were perceiving this thing? I mean, I'm not even sure you can answer this question, but I think you know where I'm going with this.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, Don. Okay. Working with cartoons, it's not the first time I've done this. Many years ago, I'm not going to say how many, when I commuted between Southern Maryland and Washington, D.C., in order to break up the monotony of the trip, one of the dream intentions I had was to dream about the Gary Larson cartoons that would be in the Washington Post that I would pick up a little later on that morning. And Gary Larson's cartoons, I'm sure most of you are familiar with them, are really quite funny. They depict a lot of animals and plays on animal actions and whatever. And there were times I really had the feeling that I was tapping into the feelings and essence of Gary Larson himself. At the time he actually did the cartoon. Now remember, these cartoons are stacked up in a row and a line. The cartoonists may make a stack of them, and they sit around for months before they actually find their way into publication. So I'm not saying that a particular cartoon was the sense of the feeling of Gary Larson at that moment, at that time of the dream. It just captured a lot of feelings. It's kind of like that painting I showed in the beginning of my talk with Ingo and the whale presentation. I really think there was a case where not only did I sense the dynamics as portrayed visually by the painting, but I really have a feeling, I really thought I hooked up or sensed something about Ingo himself, even though he had died years earlier. So there was a connection I felt with Ingo at that time. Maybe it's because I knew him over the years, but or not. But see, I didn't know. I had no idea that picture was coming my way. So when it did arrive, and I saw what was the basis of it, I could relate to this energetic, creative feelings that were not necessarily mine. Where did they come from? So I figured there was part Ingo involved.
Right.
Ingo. In terms of the cartoon figures, since I know the guys doing those cartoons are really funny guys, and they specialize in puns, and that really must be a joke to be with. I do find myself, I think, being a little more humorous during the day, upsetting my wife a little bit. Awful puns. So maybe something did creep into my subconscious, that whether it's good or not, I don't know. But yeah, I did. Some of them are funny. They're not intended to be too funny, I don't think, but they just depict unusual pun-like situations that play on words a lot. So, and I love puns. I've always been a fan of puns. I've gone my way to hear and attempt to crack a good pun. So there's something about puns that tickles me.
Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thanks for that answer. I have some more written questions. One's from Ben and Jane, and they ask, when it comes to precognition in dreams, have you found that there's a limit to the time frame for the events coming to pass? Longer versus the time versus shorter versus?
Yeah, I've thought about that a lot. Now, because I keep with an experimental frame of mind in order to evaluate things, for the precognitive dreams that I work with, I don't like to go more than a week in advance, but that's for a practical reason. If you go any longer than that, the critics will say, well, you waited a month, a year, whatever, something's bound to happen that matches that. Well, they're partially right on that, maybe totally right in some cases. But what the critics don't say is, okay, so you had a precognitive dream of some really unusual incident a year ahead that matched something that finally happened. They never ask you, well, how accurately or how close to the ground truth did the sketch that you made, how did it match? You know, they never ask you for degrees of correlation. So it's sort of a one-ended argument, one-sided argument. So either way, in my own work, I tried to limit it to a week. I tend to lose patience beyond that. I get too curious. And see, here's the other problem with this. When I was doing the 7 day ahead, that was tough. That was psychologically difficult for me. Not the actual recalling of the dream, but now here I have 6 days to wait to know whether or not I was correct or not, or my colleague was correct or not. And she didn't have as much problem with it as I did. So the day 5 comes by, day 4 comes by, then you get one more day left. Your curiosity starts overriding reality. And now you start looking at other pictures and wonder, well, maybe it's like this, maybe it's like that. So you're not introducing a future bias that you don't want. Now that might be me, just me personally, because of the experimental nature of the task I set about. Now, if you're working with the spontaneous nature of precognitive dreams, and I had one in the appendix, which kind of illustrated that. And how can I say this? It presented something which I knew would happen. It didn't bother me when it would happen. So it could have been a week or it could have been a year. I just was so convinced this event will happen. So because of that convincing, then I didn't have these concerns about the next day's paper or what I'm going to be doing over the weekend or what TV program I'm going to watch. It's full of emotion that might bias me into thinking about that. So, but there are times when you go, and I'm not necessarily speaking here for myself, but from others that I've talked to, and from the work that Louise Ryan did, and it was during the days of the Duke work, the Ryan Research Center, and the work that she compiled from analyzing tens of thousands of spontaneous cases that were sent in for her to review over the 20 or so year period that she did this. Some would go out a long distance, years. I remember reading some that were very precise in terms of the description. There was no drawing or anything made, but the description was adequate enough to visualize what the dreamer had experienced. It really was unique. And when this is like 20 years ahead. So there you are. And then somebody I once knew up in New York, I think she's still there, as part of the ASPSR, had done a little informal study that was published in one of the journals, where she thought she saw a fall off with time of her precognitive dream. I haven't seen that with what I've done, which really raises a question to me. So yeah, here we go. Missed my question.
That's a great answer.
Now, see, I'm quizzing you people. if precognition is really that accurate, and I can vouch for it up to at least 7 days in the future, then what does that tell us about the universe we live in? Is the universe partly or mostly predetermined? What does that mean? I worry about this because here's the problem I got into when I was doing this work. I was really on the fence. I wanted it to succeed because I don't like to follow up my psi experiments. I really wanted to have a success. It seemed like a good idea at the time. But if it is successful, then I have a dilemma. Now I've got to relate to the meaning of it. And a lot of people that I've talked with don't think about the meaning behind precognitive experiences. When you start moving ahead in time too far, even in the short term, it's a problem. And I didn't show a lot of the sketches I did with the future news, but some of the scenes 7 days out were really precise, and they had the people in the right position, and they had the water flowing in the right direction. And when you think about how did those people line up like that, where was the photographer? How did he get into the picture to take that photo? And why did the editors select that photo out of hundreds that he looked at? It gets to be kind of mind-boggling. There's so many little shoots to go through here, some little problems that could foul up the outcome, but it didn't happen. There was that picture that was taken 6 days earlier. So in terms of the universe, how can this be? Then not just simply, I forgot to mention some of those future news photos were of natural events. The wind blowing something over, ice breaking off of a flow in Argentina, a flood. And I'm talking 6 days out, 7 days out. So how could these natural events be perceived by anyone? I mean, I'm not just talking about me here, but anyone that would want to do that. How can we reconcile that with what we feel we're comfortable with in this universe, that it's not predetermined? There is a concept called the block universe. It's highly controversial. People have looked at Einstein's theory and say, based on symmetry arguments and this and that it doesn't disallow the existence of all things, past, present, and future. So now we have a predetermined universe. At one point I thought we were moving away from the Newtonian mechanics, which is the clockwork universe, and now we are right back in it with concepts of predeterminism, according to this one concept of the block universe. Fortunately, there's another concept that disagrees with that. But whatever the case, it is. I find it troubling and psychologically troubling. How can the universe have these be relatively fixed? Not just natural events, but also the people acting out in them, showing up in the scene, holding that particular sign 6 to 7 days ahead or whatever. It's a contradiction. I wanted to succeed at these, and yet I didn't. And because I was ambivalent and they succeeded, that means it probably more truthful than anybody else would say, because I didn't really want. Subconsciously, I don't think I wanted the result, but somehow I did.
Yeah.
And so I'm still now stuck with the dilemma of how to wrestle with this determinism versus free will thing. I think we don't have a long ways to go in this to ponder through it. People sit down and they go down the timeline of remote viewing. Okay, I'll go out here, you're about 10 years ago, I'll go out in the next century. But my goodness, what is that telling you? Maybe they've got a good glimpse of a future incident that will eventually come true. But even if that's the case, how could that be? There's a philosopher nearby that I really like to read, and he ends up talking about uncertainty, and not from the point of view of Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, although that probably figured into his philosophy. What he said, he sort of feels that uncertainty must be a part of our lives. If you think about it, if everything was certain, things would be kind of boring after a while, I would think. So uncertainty seems to be a fabric of the human life that's necessary for existence. But if that's the case, how does that relate to some of these precognitive experiences? And I'm talking about those that go way out in time, not just the 7 day heading into the future move. Where is uncertainty here? what brackets it? What are the conditions that say this future incident will happen, and it does, and which doesn't? Is there a probability thing in here? Now, for the retrocausation introduces probability concepts. I'm not particularly sold on that yet, and I have to study that more thoroughly, but if I can. But there's a lot of concepts going on there that may be pushing reality too much.
My question, Dale, would be, what if you tried to change the outcome and you had your dream and you saw what was going to happen?
Yeah.
Then you maybe told yourself to dream to change it. I mean, would you change the outcome? Would be the question.
See, this is why in my back of my mind, certainly not in the front of my mind, I think in terms of probabilities. I just can't get away from that. Maybe it's my background in physics. Then the perception of the future is somehow got to be probable. I'm biased here.
But what about the idea that if you observe something in the universe, you make it exist? So if you observe it in advance,
but
you're actually causing it.
Well, this is one of the problems I've had to deal with over the years with people in the workshops that I used to run. They would say, well, if I can do precognitive events, whether it be dreaming or in a conscious state with premonitions or whatever, and I perceive the event, am I making it happen because I've observed it? And then they follow the line of reasoning from the Copenhagen theory school of quantum physics of the observer, in fact, the so-called collapse of the waveform. So then they'll have this guilt feeling that I've had people come to me about that very thing. Did I cause that?
Yeah.
So because they perceived it as an observer, then those events will happen. You're not going to. They will happen, period. You
know what? I have found an article that talks about weak measurements, and that you can look at, in advance at the collapse of a system without collapsing it. Like, that's become a possibility now. So maybe that's what we're doing. We're dipping in and having a peek at how it's gonna collapse. But it may collapse some other way due to something that happens, depending on the time span and what kinds of timelines are crossing and influencing. So that's maybe why it seems fuzzy from 7 days out,
Yeah, I'm not sure right now where I'm in this. I'll just have to wait and see. But right now, I'm just not that sold on trying to apply quantum physics directly to this phenomenon. There seems to be some huge gaps here yet. Huge. There's some analogies and similarities maybe, but
well, one thing I was just thinking a minute ago is that say the universe is predetermined in large part, but within it there are devices that have been organized that can act with free will within this larger deterministic type of situation. So you have both, maybe.
Yeah, well, okay.
This is just something new that I'm beginning to think that
it does. It's an intriguing conundrum, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
You want it to work, yet you don't. At least that's my feeling.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Jimmy, you had your hand up for a while. Do you want to go for your question?
Yes, thank you, Dale. I really enjoyed the presentation. My question to you is, have you found in your research any group of people that may have an advantage in this precognitive dreaming stuff? Like, for example, artists, musicians versus, say, a banker or a salesman or anything like that. Thank you.
Yeah, as a member of the International Association for the Study of Dreams, we just had a conference in Tucson, Arizona a few weeks ago. This organization is people with a lot of artists, musicians, not just scientists that study the records and analyze data, but these are creative people. And from what I see, there's definitely a tendency for this population to do better on the average. Now we do run a little contest, and we do have experiences with precognitive dreams throughout the year occasionally, and definitely at the conferences. And it's not a scientific evaluation I'm making, but from what I can tell and just casual observation, the creative people will win out. They will win out. Not always, you might think about some of the people that were involved in the government and the SRI work. Pat Price, a very logical, mechanical-oriented individual, was really exceptional. But then he had an artistic tendency as well, as an excellent draftsman. So he happened to blend the two polar regions of the brain, I guess, and did well. But yeah, being creative, being open, sure, I'll put money on them any day.
Is that okay, Jimmy? Is that answer? Excellent. We should round up round about now, but Dale, I got one more question, and it goes off on a slight tangent because it's more about your Stargate and your SRI participation rather than the talk this evening. So that's why I've left it to last. And it's from John Knowles, and he said, "I don't want to interrupt the flow, but I would like to ask Dale about Ed May's claim about the importance of CRV against non-CRV data at the Fort Meade and Stargate program." He says in volume 4 of Ed May's book, he's supposed to show the greater usefulness of non-CRV against CRV. He wonders if you had any take on which was used more or which one was more effective.
I think it's a matter of what the intention was from the very beginning. People that make evaluations many times have their own preconceived biases going into it. So from the point of view what Ed said, I'm just going to take a pass.
All right, that's no problem on that. Well, we kept you here for 2 hours, and I just want to thank you on behalf of everyone for answering the questions and giving a fantastic presentation. I'm in awe of the sketches, to be honest. I think they're some of the best I've seen in RV. So thanks for this evening, and thanks for taking the time to share all this with us, Dale. I'm sure all the members here as well would like to thank you on that as well.
Thank you,
Thank
Dale.
you.
Yeah, great. And remember now,
Thank you, Dale. Thank you, Josh.
tonight you have an
Thank you.
assignment. Remember your dreams.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Thanks. Thank you. Great show.
Yeah, thanks for that, Dale. And I look forward to working with you and getting you back again, in the future to give another talk, if that's okay.
Fine. Yeah, I hope to follow up on that and do a little bit more detail relative to numbers and words, which started to come through. I just had never focused on it very much. It was more spontaneous.
Yeah, that would be awesome to see that develop. And I know John Knowles will ask that last question.
Yeah, I want to talk to John. I want to talk to John about that.
He's a big fan on that. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
Excellent. Thanks, everyone. Have a great weekend ahead and take care. And we'll see you soon for a meeting in the future.
Okay.
Thank you, Dale. Thank you, everyone. Take care.
All right.
Thank you, guys.
Bye,
Great to see
everyone.
Bye.